Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is The Gailey Show. I am your host, JP Derbergosian. We are your answer to the question, what is a queer thing I can read, watch, or go to in the Twin Cities and beyond? And I am so pleased to have our guest today because they put together a book, wrote and illustrated, that is something that we need more of in the world. So my guests today are Bergman and Saul Freedman-Lawson. Bear and Saul, welcome to The Gailey Show.
Thanks so much.
So, Bear, let's start with you. So the book title is Special Topics and Being Human. Can you give us a little brief synopsis of what your book is about?
Yes. Special Topics in Being a Human is an advice book that is about how to make your impact as a person most closely match your intentions as a person. And I think a lot of us are sort of out in the world with ideas about what we want to be making happen in the world, how we want to show up, how we want to feel. And sometimes we are successful, and sometimes I have the experience all the time where I have a very clear idea about what I wish to be doing and how I want it to work. And I do it carefully and intentionally, and then the result is not what I hoped for or imagined. And so for me, Special Topics in Being a Human is really just a compendium of my various mistakes as I learned over the course of time to try to be a little more, to get my impact closer to what I wanted it to be in some of the more complicated kinds of human interaction.
So, and this is based off of your column, correct? Ask Bear?
Yes. For quite a long time, I had an advice column, Asking Bear. It started out at the Toast website, which some people may remember. Roxane Gay had a vertical on the Toast called The Butter.
Yeah.
So Ask Bear started there. And then it moved over to Bitch Media, Bitch Magazine for 3 and a bit years before it finally went to its own home. But yes, the advice book, the first Special Topics in Being a Human, definitely spun out of the Asking Bear advice column.
So talk to me about you could have just done that as a text version, but you wanted to have it be illustrated, and Saul, you were the illustrator on that. So, I mean, talk to me about that collaboration of wanting to go that particular route with the book.
I mean, at first it was honestly a whim. It was the first summer of COVID, and I was working on my column, and I sort of had this weird outlier piece that wasn't really an answer to a question. It was sort of an answer looking for a question. And, you know, for people who love the deep cuts, this was the first chapter ever to be illustrated was how to avoid getting your feelings all over other people from Special Topics and Being a Human. And I couldn't figure out how to make it the answer to a question. And Saul was there for dinner one night, and my husband, who was also there, also does a lot of work around how illustration makes sometimes difficult content more accessible to people. Mm-hmm. And I just completely on an impulse, I said to Saul over, I don't know, pasta, hey, would you consider giving it a try and illustrating this whole chapter of or this whole advice piece. And he said, sure, like, everybody had a lot of time at that particular moment. And when he came back with it, it was shockingly good, was the other thing. Like, I really thought illustration plus text, like 1 + 1 would equal 2, but it absolutely didn't. It was 11, right? Like, Saul's illustrations elevated the text so much and gave it so much depth and color and nuance that I was immediately hooked on how great it was, and also how much smarter I immediately seemed. And so I said, hey, do you want to do another one? And that was that.
So, Saul, take me through the process. Like, how did you approach illustrating Bear's words and trying to convey that meaning in an illustrated format?
I think something we've talked about, I think especially this time around, is like Bear is a storyteller and really writes like a storyteller. And so in some ways, his writing already has suits itself, I think, really well to the pacing of comics, which is a little closer to me to like film or audio, because you're moving across time in a different way. But all the chapters we've done, he sent me text and I go through and break it down into pages and what each page roughly will look like. And then I illustrate it and send it back. So we do the text and the illustration pretty separately, and then they fit together.
Bear, how was seeing the pages come through, how was that impacting your writing choices?
It's amazing and delightful. And I always feel a little bit like I'm trying to write interesting enough things so that Saul can make good art out of them. But it is also true what Saul says, that I am naturally inclined toward visual images when I try to explain something. So I think that in that way, sort of seeing it come to life is like magic. And occasionally, of course, I write something thinking, oh, I'm gonna love the picture of this. There's a page in our new book. We just finished another second book together called Special Topics in Being a Parent, where I wrote, more effective preparation for parenting would have been going to Grand Central Terminal and trying to put shoes on an octopus. And as I wrote it, I thought, I cannot wait to see a picture of me in Grand Central Station trying to put shoes on an octopus.
So that is okay. Special topics and I'm sorry, in my research here, that also is the one I want to get to, the special topics and being a parent. Sorry, I'm conflating both of your titles, bad interviewer. But walk through. No. So you had this initial book that led you then to the parent. So obviously the collaboration was going well between the two of you. I mean, you found something that was clearly working, and having seen the being a parent, I mean, you've got something really going on there that's very unique and very special, and also dealing with something, a literature, I mean, nonfiction and fiction that is getting into what does it actually mean now that we can just be parents, right? We can, we're not necessarily, yes, we are still like fighting for the rights to do that, but now we're sort of in the thick of it. And so how did you want to come to start that project? First of all, I guess is my initial question.
I felt a little let down by a lot of the parenting books that existed. Many of them were very gendered. I felt often somewhat pointlessly so. And in particular, I felt aggravated by a lot of the books that were specifically meant for dads. Many of them seemed to have been written in a sports bar. And they were full of advice like, do some dishes every once in a while. The little lady's gonna love it. Which, like, yes, do dishes. But I didn't really feel, it's 2024. I feel like a lot of men who are having children really want to be engaged, present fathers, and that the books have really not caught up. I also felt like a lot of parenting books didn't, their advice was very mainstream and they didn't take into account any of the ways that people might be parenting beyond the mainstream. And also a lot of the values related books, which I think Special Topics in Being a Parent is, in many ways, a values related book. Many of the ones that really dealt with values in parenting were intensely religious. And I'm not against that, but I think that there are a lot of people who also hold values, important ones, and also want to be able to parent in accordance with those values. And especially for progressive parents, maybe there's no modeling that they have experienced for how to put progressive values into action as a parent, right? Like the way they were parented, maybe the way many of us, right? Like I was born in 1974. Parenting was a very different deal back then. Conversations between parents and children, I think, were very different. And so for me, Special Topics in Being a Parent was about, a little bit, let's be honest, it's about ego, right? Like having figured out as many things as I have about parenting, to be fair, mostly through messing them up several times, but like, I felt like I knew things that I wanted to share that would be useful. But also I felt excited about the idea of a parenting book that felt broadly inclusive and also broadly optimistic, I think.
Brie, we've got about a minute left here. So okay, talk to me about how did you visualize the aesthetic of that, of having a queer parenting book? I know that's a really big question, but generally speaking, like, how did you approach that?
I think I'm always drawing, like I always default to drawing queer and trans people. Because that's my world and my community, and that's who I'm around. And I liked drawing parents who look like the parents I know, and kids who look like the kids I know. And my hope is that even parents who aren't queer or who don't look like every person in the book will both like still feel reflected in that and also think a little more about what a parent can look like, what they could look like as a parent, what a child can look like.
That's beautiful. We're going to have to leave it there for right now. The book is Special Topics in Being a Parent. Bergman, Saul Freedman-Lawson. How can we follow you on social media and buy the book?
I am on all the social medias. If you type in Bear Bergman, you will find me. Since you noted that you are in Minneapolis, I will say I'm coming to Minneapolis November 17th. I think I have an event at Moon Palace Books.
Yeah.
And then on the 18th, I am performing a show at the just about to open Queer Community Center. And you can buy the book anywhere books are sold, but of course, it's best if you buy it from your local independent bookstore or directly from the press, Arsenal Pulp.
Perfect. We love Queer Community. We're doing a lot of partnerships with them as they're launching. It's very exciting to finally have them here and have an LGBTQ center in Minneapolis. But for right now,
I didn't get Saul's social media answer.
Oh,
I'm my own name everywhere. And my first initial and my last name. And if for some reason people wanted to order a book from Canada, they could order it from the bookstore where I work, which is another story. But probably
perfect.
that's not convenient.
Perfect. We will link to all of your accounts and websites in the show notes. If you're listening to this on any podcast platform, on our YouTube description, and on our website, am950radio.com. Bear and Saul, thank you for joining us here on The Gailey Show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, well, joining me now, I'm so excited to have our next guest, Tina Horn, whose new book is called Why Are People Into That?, which is based off of the podcast of the same name. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see Tina is holding up the book cover, which is spectacular. So, Tina, welcome to The Gailey Show.
I am incredibly happy to be here and giving the listeners a little book ASMR there. I always try to do that for the tactile among us, but I'm so thrilled to be on the Gailey Show. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And also to have a fellow Lambda Literary Fellow is also extra special for this conversation. But let's start with your book and tell us what it is about, because it is absolutely delightful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so Why Are People Into That is really, it's a nonfiction book. It's a book of essays. It's a book of cultural criticism. It was sort of my sneaky way of really finally living up to my sort of career-long, adult life-long strategy of screaming sex now that I have your attention. So, I've been saying that it is as much a book about my love of popular culture, like movies and music, everything from David Lynch to Prince, but then also countercultures and how they work and the vitality of countercultures and how countercultures produce knowledge and information and queer ones in particular, and all of the pleasure and adventure and experiences that I personally have to thank countercultures for, and probably most of the human beings reading this book have a counterculture or two or three to thank for the most pleasurable moments of their lives. So I sort of wanted to explore that theory and to bring in some history and connect a lot of dots in the constellation of how we conceptualize and experience fetish sex over the past 200 years or so, and where that brings us today, and even thinking a little bit about the future of production of countercultural history, the future of history. Now that we've reached the end of history, we have to start to think about the future of history in the 21st century.
And also to vote to keep out the Christian nationalists from trying to, stop all of this and regulate our bodies even more than they're trying to do right now. So just your daily reminder, folks, you still have less than 2 weeks to vote. So get out and vote.
I endorse us getting political in that way. Yes, 100%. Yes. And I don't mind saying that part of why I'm like this is growing up in a very homophobic, racist, white supremacist town in Northern California. Not everyone realizes that California has these some of the most beautiful rural places in California are just overrun by Christian white nationalists. And with all due respect to people who actually are living their life in accordance with values of love and compassion, unfortunately, a lot of my experiences from a very young age were of, like the sort of like cultural imperialism and just like fear-based lifestyle of a lot of supposedly Christian white nationalists, and it certainly made a lifelong rebel out of me. So yeah, I'm allergic to all that stuff that makes me break out in hives. So that's part of why I've devoted my life to freaky sex, because then they just stay away from me.
So I agree 100%. And I could go off down and I don't want to say it's a tangent, but that could be a whole other episode that we could get into here. But
we'll table that.
The pursuit of that. So you have the podcast and you have the book. So the book is not just recaps of, episodes from the podcast, but talk to us about the relationship between, what you cover and the podcast, and then how you chose to curate that into the book itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I was telling a friend recently who is starting, a Black dominatrix friend of mine who is starting work on her memoir. And one of the things that I do these days is coaching, intimacy and relationship and sex coaching, very similar work to what I did as a professional, and what I still do as a professional dominatrix. But there was a time in my life that was like full-time dungeon time. But then I also consult and coach people on their creative projects, from literature to theater and television. I was on the set of Pose, consulting about details about sex work and kink, and which was a kind of a walk in the park for me. I've definitely been in some spaces consulting where I'm like, okay, we need to start from square one. And one of the pleasures of working on Pose was being literally on set with Janet Mock and Jenny Livingston and all of these performers who already know what they're doing. I'm just mostly there to give the thumbs up for FX. But anyway, so I was talking to a friend of mine and suggesting that she make a list of her top 10 favorite memoirs, or essentially books that are comps for the book that she wants to make. And one thing that I said to her was, if you find that you are coming up short on memoir books, even though you want to write a memoir book, I absolutely want to encourage you to put things on this list that might seem really out of left field. For example, with Why Are People Into That? One of my biggest influences was this podcast that became a book while I was turning my podcast into a book. And the podcast is called 60 Songs That Explain the 90s. And it's a wonderful, no free ads, but I loved this. It's still happening. They're in the 2000s now. But I was so inspired by this podcast about music while I was writing a book about sex. And I think that sometimes coming at things sideways can unlock things for you, and keep you out of that stagnation that can happen, especially when you're working on a really big project. And when that book, or when that podcast, 60 Songs That Explain the 90s, became a book, I was so excited about it, and I liked the book, and it was so interesting to get it and to realize, because I was so deep in process, I was like, oh, I see exactly what you did. You took your scripts and you massaged them and finessed them. I don't know this for sure. I haven't spoken to Rob Hervilla, the host and writer of the show, but I feel pretty confident that he / the team working on that massaged the scripts into book form. And that is essentially like a novelization. Did you ever read like novelizations of movies that you loved when you were a kid? I certainly did. I would read anything I could get my hands on. But but yes, and so it also helped me to define that like the project that I was working on was different than that. Not better, not worse, just different. And that kind of a project is like, okay, it's kind of like book as merchandise, like, oh, if you're a fan of the podcast, then you want to have this book on your shelf. Which makes a lot of sense to me because podcasts, as you know well, are ephemeral media, and it, I don't know when you were born, but I
Ephemeral.
was.
That is a great word for this.
Yeah, and it can feel abstract, and like I was born in 1982, so I'm an analog girly. So and that counts for fandom. That definitely counts for like I like to. I guess it's an ego thing to like signal to people like these are my interests. You can tell by my bookshelf. But I don't know. How do you relate to that? Do you feel like you need to have physical things in your home surrounding you that you can be like conversation starters with guests?
Oh, I don't so much care about my I think for me, once I have an attachment to something, I like to have, when I have an emotional attachment to something, I do like to have something tactile that I can relate to, which is, being analog when we had, 8-tracks and cassette tapes and CDs and for like a hot minute DVDs. But now everything's, on the streaming, on the clouds and everything. So I can have access to it wherever I go, so long as I have some type of a screen. But I don't have it. So I can see the appeal of having, and if they do it right, and I believe you did it right, in terms of, translating, if that's the right word, the podcast into, a book, because if it's just transcripts, you know what I mean, then it's a little bit like, what did you add here? Whereas a book, you have the opportunity to add, to it, which I think is really important. I do, because we've got like a couple minutes here left, I do want to ask, generally speaking, when we talk about a cultural investigation into kink, like what does that mean for folks who are going to, pick it up and turn to page 1?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so there are every chapter of Why Are People Into That, like the podcast, is separated into different themes that have to do with fetishes or kinky sexual interests. Excuse me. So, you asked about page 1. The first chapter is about feet, and that is definitely an exploration of foot guys, foot people of all genders, and people, who are interested in worshiping feet or having their feet worshipped, people who are into pampered feet, smelly feet, all the different things that I love feet, and I'm very switchy. This is a very switchy book, very verse book, and it's not written in verse. It's versatile. And so I use an exploration of why people are into feet and how we talk about a desire for feet in our culture to investigate where do the ideas of this particular sexual interest as a pathology come from. So do like a little bit of really like Wikipedia level history of mental health and fetishes. But then by the next chapter, which is about spanking, which anyone who follows my work knows is a particular passion of mine, that's sort of an opening, if you will, an entryway into an exploration of sadomasochism and all different kinds of erotic pain. From there, we get into consensual non-consent and fantasies and role plays and why we like to pretend that we're something that we're not when we're playing, and and then we get into some fetishes that I actually really, despite all of my efforts to try them in lots of different ways, that I just have concluded that I really don't like splashing, just like wet and messy play. So then that is an opportunity for me to kind of put myself in my own hot seat and be like, if something really actually triggers more repulsion than repulsion attraction for me, what does it look like for me to try to have compassion for people who like something and, as we say in the kink world, not yuck their yum.
Right.
And so, there's whatever you're into, you will probably find an exploration of what you're into in Why Are People Into That? And
Well, I
even
love that. I hate to
Yeah.
cut you off.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We are going to very quickly give us your website so that folks can check out all of the work that you do.
Absolutely. So I am at tinahorn.net. That's tinahorn.net. I'm most active on Instagram in the social media world, and I'm at Tina Horn's Ass, which is TINAHORNSASS. And Why Are People Into That is available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook in read in these exact dulcet tones, wherever you get all of those things in all of those mediums. And it's gay as hell. It's, if you're straight, you'll find something to enjoy, but it's for the gays.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, Tina, thank you so much for being on The Gaily Show. Folks at home, thank you for listening. You can check this out in video. Go to our YouTube channel. Just look for AM950 or at The Gaily Show. And until next Saturday, see you queers and allies in the bookstores.